Welcome, listeners. Welcome back to the TasFarmers Talks podcast. Let's go around the table. We have a guest to introduce and some regulars. I might introduce the high-achieving Steph Terry from TasBerries, Chair of PET and Farm Extraordinaire in Berries. How would you describe yourself, Steph?
Not a farm extraordinaire. No, I'm a lawyer. I've practiced in predominantly family law and property law in private practice, but also a little bit in government and at Tas Irrigation in between a couple of children. So we own a property out in Deloraine. We've got a couple of sites where we do berry production, run a bit of beef cattle and some cropping, but predominantly growing berries for Driscoll's Australia as an independent grower.
So 2 properties, two in here, Tas, and 1 in Queensland.
3 in Northern Tassie and 1 in Queensland, yes.
Fantastic. We also have our own Michelangelo da Vinci, Neil Grose. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Grace. And Da Vinci and Michelangelo, probably the Michelangelo of drinking coffee and talking rubbish, but that's about as far as it goes, I think.
Oh, we're trying to put you on a high pedestal, Neil.
Oh, well, good luck with that.
And the wonderful, terrific president, Ian Sauer. How are you, Ian?
Well, I'm great. Thanks, Grace. And I'll have to get Sally to listen to this intro. Someone thinks I'm terrific. That's great.
Look, it's been a big night overnight in politics. Yesterday afternoon, the Premier announced a major shake-up, scrapping the Department of State Growth and creating the new Building Tasmania, straight out of Yes Minister, to, as he says, get the projects delivered. And I know you're highly critical of GBEs and other government organisations. Why are the government-owned and state-backed services such a critical issue for Tasmanian farmers right now?
Well, it's interesting, Grace, in that nearly every business sector might deal with 1 or 2 departments in state growth, but the farming sector deals with them all, nearly without exception. It doesn't matter if it's road, infrastructure, hospitals, ports, rail, they all come under state growth. And the farming community, not just what Ian and Steph or Neil might say, but from our farmer surveys, year after year, the issue of GBEs and complexity and slowness and red tape comes up constantly. When you've got a productive side of the economy in farming, it just slows everything down. So there's a high degree of frustration. So TasFarmers, we came out of the blocks very quickly yesterday. We congratulate the government, we congratulate the Premier on getting into state growth and hopefully to make things better. But we see this as the start.
So, Steph, I know you love a bit of red tape. What does it actually look like on farm when you're dealing with government business enterprises, statutory authorities and other regulated utilities? What's the real impact?
Time, money, frustration. A lot of farmers like to just get on with things and get things done. A business, for example, like ours, which is a bit bigger, seems to attract a lot of interest from people that do or don't know us. You feel like a bit of a target sometimes. So we have to do everything above board, whether that is employing people, doing property development on site for accommodation or just expansion of agricultural production. It feels like anything we try and do has some sort of red tape that creates a problem or a delay. We are certainly all for democratic processes and having timeframes and having objection processes or appeal processes, but some of it becomes very challenging, costly, and it really puts you off wanting to do development or progression and innovation when you've come across these problems and you've got employees trying to plan for seasonal production, trying to forecast what happens. We've got weather challenges. And then when you're trying to also do that side of the business, when you've got pressures from council or other processes outside of our business and outside of our control, it can cause a lot of delay and frustration internally.
How much time's taken up in the business with the regulatory activities, would you say?
I would say there's probably between 4 and 5 of our management staff who specifically deal with either internal or external production, planning, development roles. So if you're sort of looking at that, that's a full-time job times 5. And that's just us in our business. We also use external consultants, and that adds to the time and the complexity and the cost.
Sounds like really big costs. Policy guru, Neil, what's going on in terms of, is this really about cost, delays and accountability around projects? We've seen a number of, poorly sized garages. Is there a deeper structural design issue across the whole public service and sector delivery model?
Yeah, I think so, because, bureaucracies often develop their own bureaucracy, and they often, after a while, and this is classic Yes Minister, where bureaucracies end up serving to grow the bureaucracy rather than improve outcomes back to the community, whether that be business or agriculture or the average family, where you almost end up with these empire building where decisions are made which are in the best interests of what happens internally than what happens externally. And every now and again, it does need an absolute kick in the pants. I remember when I was back with the Chamber of Commerce, I hosted a lunch for Jeff Kennett, which ended up going in all sorts of directions, as you'd expect. But he talked a lot about when he became Premier of Victoria and Victoria was in an absolute mess. And he put it in the terms that he invited 50,000 public servants to find a new career. So he absolutely upended the public service in Victoria and set Victoria on a whole new trajectory around developing a new Melbourne. So all of that South Bank stuff, Jeff Shed, the exhibition centre, really just changed the focus of Melbourne. But one of the interesting things he said was that when he made that big change, the unemployment rate in Victoria did not change one bit. So all those people who were really engaged in being public servants and had that career, while it was very disruptive for them on a personal level, they all found something else to do. So governments in particular should never be frightened of making those seismic changes where they're in the best interests of the state overall. And I think our current Liberal government have just put their toe in the water, and with any luck they get into it knee deep and really thrash this public service or the public service as a whole, so it is serving the best interests of Tasmania. And as I've said before, to make this good ship of Tasmania go faster, because we can go a lot faster, and we should, and we have to.
So this is straight out of Jeff Kennett's playbook. Is this
Well, I'm pretty sure Jeremy, the Premier, rather, hasn't been taking advice from Jeff, but if Jeff was to give that advice, I'm sure that's what he'd say, is just don't muck around. You may think you're in a minority government, but the political reality is that you've got the same power as a majority, because none of the crossbench, none of the Greens, none of the Labor Party want to go to an election because they know they'll be tipped out. So the government may as well, seize the day. What's the old Latin? Carpe diem.
Carpe diem.
Carpe diem. Seize the day and get on with it, because this is the prime opportunity. But if we don't do it now, we're going to be in an awful mess. So we just got to get on with it.
Ian, we've heard Steph's examples, but members regularly hit you up on the phone. What do they really tell you about some of the service providers and government monopolies? What's the impact?
The impact to the people that ring, well, not only me but come into the office, is the cost of the regulations, and that's either in the paperwork through green and red tape, the delays in getting developments done on their properties, and whether that's the government GBEs, whether it's TasNetworks, or state roads, state growth, whether it's local government, they've all got this enormous impact upon the rural community when we want to develop. And I think the issue is a little bit bigger. And I just want to deviate a second, Grace, and if you think, I'm only going to go 2 layers of the onion. Tasmania's economy, it's just like any household, but Tasmania's economy, the problem with Tasmania is that we are very small, and the bulk of our income actually comes from the Australian government through GST and a whole heap of other revenues. At the same time, we've got an economy, apart from the debt, which is horrendous, but a lot of the other financial indicators are all looking reasonably good. And that's not me, that's National Australia Bank and Rabobank and others that are saying they're quite good. But like anything else, we need to make Tasmania an attractive place to invest in. whether that's local capital, national capital or international capital to get going. And if you've got a pocket full of money, you're going to spend that money where you're going to get the best return in the fastest amount of time. So for Tasmania, it needs to be portrayed as a place that is investment ready, and the GBEs and the government and everyone else will help you to spend your money to make Tasmania better again. And so the way to do that, everyone that I talk to that wants to invest large amounts of money in Tasmania, some of them won't do it because it's too complex and too difficult. Others do it because it's quite specific and they can see the end game. But we should be leading the way in Tasmania. We're a small island, relatively small economy, 500,000 people, but we're clogged up with red tape, green tape, local government. I mean, everything is constrained to make difficult. But what surprises me is that we actually are punching above our weight through all of that complexity anyway, which is good, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be better.
Steph, you see that complexity, and I know you often talk about how you invest in your own businesses. What does the red tape mean for you in terms of investment? How do you look at it?
We want certainty. So anything we do on farm is generally a long-term investment. We want to make sure that what we're doing will still be viable 10, 15, 20 years' time. We also have expanded our operation up into Queensland. So as Ian said, we do actually have it quite good down here in Tassie. When you travel around up there in regional Queensland, the roads, internet service, a lot of the services we get up there are substandard. Even the water, it's salty. The production of horticulture, we find that we've got to look at options just to desalinate the water. So what we have down here in Tassie is amazing, and we do have a lot of leading innovative production of fruit and vegetable and other commodities down here. I think sometimes people don't look at the bigger picture and see how well we have it. But when it comes to doing things, it is just incredibly frustrating because it takes so long. There's so many avenues. There's so many. It's available for anyone to object to or give their two bob's worth. And I feel like sometimes if there were perhaps more straightforward guidelines that gave people the option to object on specific ground for a fair and reasonable issue, but if it's just for any old thing, that it could be struck out at an earlier point so that it doesn't waste time and money of people trying to develop, councils, consultants, and it can move forward.
So that looks like someone in CBD Melbourne not being able to object potentially to a project that has no real impact on them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, they should be allowed to object if they want.
Yeah.
They can pay for the privilege.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
So to the floor, really, what's the biggest friction point right now? Is it energy, ports, water, planning, compliance? What do we think? What are we hearing?
Put your hand in the magic bag and pull the first one out. I mean, I was talking to some growers the other day who have been investing quite heavily in irrigation, as you would. I'm in a state with 27% of the nation's stored water. You need to get it on your paddocks. Not far from here, there's a farmer who has put in, I think, at least 5 new pivots. All of them are very close to the local network, all of which have been installed with diesel pumps on them because it is too hard to connect, too long to connect, too expensive to connect to the grid. And this is always meant to have been Tasmania's forte, which is cheap, clean hydroelectricity. We make it here, and this is how we grow the state. I mean, that's why the major industrial is here, because of cheap electricity, but it is now becoming a myth. Talking to another grower, and this will concern every farmer in Tasmania. He's had his forward power contracts forwarded to him for the next 3 years from his broker, and his power cost will probably double between now and 2030. So this year he estimates he'll spend about $80,000 irrigating his crops. So he irrigates potatoes, peas, beans, onions, poppies, the same as so many other growers do. He'll spend $80,000 this season on electricity. In 3 years' time, that'll be $160,000. That's not counting the increase in network charges courtesy of Marinus and other things. At the same time, we have this global pressure to reduce prices, particularly in Tasmania at the farm gate. There are ways. So we look for the leadership of our state-owned companies, of our GBEs and our government to find a way through this. So, and this is where the complexity of red tape and other things and policy decisions where we focus on national markets, but we're going to send pretty much every local farmer here nearly broke in the interest of the national market. When you think of local government and how that interacts with TasWater and that nexus between TasWater supplying water and sewerage to residential homes, but it's owned by the 29 councils in the state as well as a small share by state government. I mean, it is increasingly inefficient, and they're gold plating everything in the interest of driving return back to local government, which are also at the same time increasing rates to farmers. I hate to be getting negative around this, Grayson, but you talk to farmers and you talk to around how the dial can be set from a policy position from our state-owned companies and government, and you think the dial is being turned too far the other way.
This dial turning, it's a nice metaphor. What opportunities are we really missing here? What are we forgoing in this state by not investing in more deeply in ag and making sure some reasonable decisions get made? Ian, what do you think?
Well, we're missing out on growing the economy and diversifying our economy. Just picking up on what Neil was saying, I mean, there are some structural issues that people don't understand. I mean, energy is one of the drivers of all economies around the world, no doubt about it. Tasmania's running out of energy. I mean, we've had the Boyer Mill who wanted to expand. Hydro couldn't supply that power. They'd firm it, but they had to get power from somewhere else. So there's a structural problem there. We've also got the GBEs, and governments, plural, over a long period of time have used the GBEs as a honeypot. And the KPI for those GBEs is to supply the government with monies. Now, it's now showing up that the GBEs haven't been able to keep the maintenance up on, whether it's the dams or the power lines or the roads. There's a whole range of stuff. So we're actually now paying for that. So there needs to be, it's a structural problem. So what the government has to do, saying to the GBEs, we don't want short-term financial gains for the government. They've got to be profitable. They've got to make money. I mean, that goes without saying. But we need to extend those financial horizons over a longer period of time as a KPI. But we also need to have some sort, call it a social or another non-financial economic KPI in there, where they've got to demonstrate what they're doing to stimulate business and industry in Tasmania under that portfolio. Now, unless we start doing something like that and looking strategically over 10 years and not this ridiculous 3 or 4 year election cycle process to prop up the budgets, in another 10 years we'll be having the same conversation.
And this is one of the challenges, and to get back to a granular level, we have this issue at the moment about moving grain onto the Devonport wharf. Now, it's a seasonal thing, and grain growers and carters will take their excess grain to the wharf there and sell it to that facility that's on the wharf. Now, there's been a real issue around this having the right accreditation for truck drivers to drive onto the wharf. It's called a Maritime Safety Compliance card or something. It's some acronym. I'm not very good at acronyms, Grayson, as you know.
We're trying to eliminate them here.
So, some simple logical thinking would be, rather than having every driver have to have this card, why don't you move the red line for where you need that card onto the other side of where the grain facility is? And then you don't need any of that. I mean, they're going onto the wharf, they're going onto a wharf, dropping off their grain and leaving again. They're not going near any other critical port infrastructure or anything like that. Just move the darn line. It's, $30 a paint from Bunnings. Job finished. But no, we have to complicate it. We have to get a certificate. We have to have accreditation. Drivers have to spend 15 minutes online doing a ticker box exercise. And that is just one example. I'm sure, Steph, you would have hundreds in the industry which you're involved in, with its so many interactions with the supply chain and government and regulation all the way through. And you wonder why we cannot compete with countries like Europe and India and China, because we're just over-regulating ourselves.
But the issue on that one, Nathan, Neil, is that the accreditation then comes from Western Australia. It's not done in Tasmania. And then the other countries that we're competing with or exporting against don't have the same or similar types of complexities. And then when you go to the GBEs and you go to the minister, they get letters written back to TasFarmers by a muppet somewhere in the department says, oh, we're complying with international standards and safety and we can't do anything about it. Well, if those people that were writing the letters and overseeing that were actually having to pay the money out and dealing with the complexity, they'll change their mind very quickly.
What's the reality in your business? You've fresh produce. How does the export situation look for you and compliance?
Well, getting produce out of Tassie on a daily basis for sort of a 9-month period is costly. Obviously, shipping across Bass Strait in our peak season, we're usually about 4 40-foot shipping containers a day.
4?
Yes. We're expanding, we're going through development at the moment to increase that significantly again next year. So it becomes expensive, but even just to supply supermarkets, we're going through probably between our sites in Tassie and our Queensland site in excess of $50,000 a year of audits for compliance, for ethical sourcing of labour, food sanitation, just farm safety, everything and anything you can think of. We have independent auditors come in from 3 or 4 different companies to say, yes, you're doing things the right way, tick the box, you can supply the supermarket. Of course, we comply because that's what our job is, but I feel like there needs to be more thought given to trusted long-term farmers that do the right thing to give us a bit of a break, and whether that looks like auditing on a less regular basis or having a system where if you haven't had issues for a certain period of time, that perhaps you're going to go to sort of more irregular compliance where it's not an annual issue. We have these systems and checks from every different angle happening in our business all the time. So we're always striving to do things the right way, by the book. And as I said, we often, as a bigger business, have a target on your back. You have people photographing things onto the farm from the road. We see it happen quite regularly. You have reports to people suggesting that you've done X, Y, and Z. When they come and look at site, they know that it's not, but they have to investigate it, follow it up. And it just, it feels like these days you have to do everything by the book, because if you don't, or even if it's perceived that you're not doing it, you've got a target on your back and you end up in more cost.
Critics might say less regular checks and audits might reduce standards. What would your response to that be?
If you're in a situation like we are, where we do it all the time because we know what the consequence is if you don't, and you're a trusted producer, for example, with a certain company that does your auditing, if we were to do it every second year, for example, it would cut down a lot of time and complexities in our own business, where we can continue to actually do the right thing, put that focus back on day-to-day operations, rather than someone sitting in an office and having to collate information just to show that we are doing the right thing. And I'm talking some of this is just petty as saying there's an exit sign in a room that has one door. To say that for a fire safety, you're in an office that has one entrance, one exit. You have to have multiple signs to say that's the exit. And we're talking about producing crops outside, and that's what we're having to do inside an office space.
And Neil's talked about the Jeff Kennett experience. Are there any other examples, either in Tasmania or interstate, where reform has genuinely improved outcomes?
Oh, dearie.
I reckon you'll struggle to think of anywhere in Australia where there's been any reform.
Look, I am struggling. And look, to be fair, I think that over the last few years, there has been an attempt by some of the GBEs to streamline and let's have an example. TasNetworks, for instance, when they were dealing with farmers with the land acquisition process. I mean, we've worked hard with them. We had to develop up the land access code. So they're now dealing with farmers much more openly and in a better way. We still get the odd complaint, and we'll jump on that. So that's happening. But they've been tinkering around the edges. I mean, what we need is that we need to have, a full-blown go at this. And look, the GBEs shouldn't be any different to a listed company. So that one, the chair and the board. I mean, the minister's always the person that in the end is accountable, and we've seen that happen with TT Line and TasPorts, and the minister fell on his sword there. But, if that was a publicly listed company or publicly listed companies that acted the way they did over that issue alone, the shareholders, that's the Tasmanian community, would be calling for the board and the chairs to be sacked immediately. I mean, there just wouldn't be any hesitation about it. If you're a listed company, or indeed any company, I mean, you've got to work within the rules, and ATSIC and a whole heap of other organisations have, governance and compliance issues you've got to deal with. It seems sometimes that, we've said local government in Tasmania, they're a protected species. I think some of the GBEs are the same as well, because they can hide under the cloak of being a government organisation. They don't have to comply. And I think, if they had to pay personally for the decisions that they made that went wrong, the decisions wouldn't go wrong. And I don't think it would stifle innovation. I mean, it would just make them think out of the box a bit better.
Well, rather than genuine reform, it just feels like we're hearing more and more about red and green tape. So to lead you there a bit, Ian, what's coming down the pipeline when we talk about other things like net zero?
Oh, heavens to Betsy. Well, what's coming there is there's going to be more complexity. And look, the issue of climate, everyone's grappling with climate change. I mean, I think the bulk of the community understand that climate change is there and it's here. However, trying to mitigate and get to net zero is going to be is costing, and it's going to be costing for the farmers. And we've got the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, for instance, who are there. That's one of their things, is to try and mitigate, get down to net zero. But they've converted about 18 million hectares, which is 4% of the agricultural land in Australia, into trees. Now, again, we were talking before about, Steph was talking about her business, what do they need? You need clean air, you need time, you need to be able to see the end game. Well, goodness gracious me, what we've now got in Australia is that we've got a growing population and a world population that's growing. We're getting less and less land to grow that food upon, and yet we're expected to fill that void with food and fibre on less land for a growing population. Absolute nonsense. The other thing that people forget about is that when they're talking about on-farm emissions, they only ever talk about the gross emissions. They never talk about the net emissions. And it's an absolute fact that farms in a relatively high rainfall that are managing their pastures well and pasture utilisation within a farm forestry are sequestering more carbon than they're emitting. So it's about time that we started, getting over that. So 4% of the agricultural land is going to be, locked up in that, in trying to get to net zero. To me, is an absolute nonsense when we're going to have food security issues coming down the track. And, all of this, these transaction costs, the economists have put out that it's worth about, between $8 and $16 billion. I mean, it's a huge amount of money. It's huge. In many instances, to get a feel-good factor. Now, I'm not saying that we should be, red-necked and cavalier and all the rest of it. I think we need to be careful. We need to start wrapping some science about it. We need to have a proper understanding of what's happening on the farm. I mean, Grayson, we don't know across the Australian landscape, because it's not collected in a consistent way, what's happening across the landscape environmentally. How much carbon's being stored, how much is being emitted. We don't know how much land is locked up for biodiversity. We know farmers are doing that all the time. We don't know what the value of ecosystem services are. However, at the same time, all of this is happening. We've got Clean Energy Finance Corporation, we've got banks, we've got accountancy firms, World Wildlife Fund. There's a whole range of people trying to develop up processes. The only consistency in all of that is the farmers are the last to be consulted.
And we are being outcompeted because of this. Like Belgium, which has got some of the deepest and most fertile soils on the planet. Like, here's a fun fact. They produce about a third of the world's frozen vegetables that get distributed around the world. A third. Belgium. Fertilised by plenty of Australian blood during the First and Second World War, I might add.
Yeah.
So we compete against that. We compete against those international trade winds which push our prices down, yet our compliance and our regulatory burden increases all the time. We simply cannot keep pushing pushing back against that, and you talk about climate change and net zero, we do have some amazing opportunities and resources in this country, particularly with offshore wind, yet for some reason the federal government made the decision to extend the boundaries where offshore wind can be developed, pushed it out into water that's too deep, and now it's uneconomical. So no one will develop offshore wind now because it's too expensive. Whereas we had a clear opportunity to do that on sea, away from everyone else, without, developing a whole range of issues around community acceptance around where the wind towers are. But we moved it offshore further. Why would we do that?
Another missed opportunity. Steph, if we put all the sharp objects and heavy things away for a moment, and I say net zero to you, what springs to mind?
I think what Ian said before is that usually the farmers are the last ones to really be informed and given the opportunity to have any say in it or understanding of what it is. And I have heard it at multiple conferences in the last few years, but still as a producer, we're unclear what it is. And we grow annual plants predominantly. We do have some plants that stay in the ground for 2, 4, 8 years, depending on the variety and what type of crop it is. But surely when you're planting, over 1 million, 2 million plants that come and go, they're producing flowers, they're producing foliage, they're producing fruit, and they're replaced vigorously every year. That must have some kind of impact, but it's how it's accounted for and how it is actually measured that we're not sure. We don't understand enough about it and what the impact is and how it is actually determined from someone up here in office on the mainland as to whether that does have an impact on what we're doing and whether that can be accounted for. Again, I feel like I'm lost in this conversation because I don't know enough about how it is actually calculated, but it would be good to find out if what we do is having an impact, because we can have paddocks of pasture for cattle to feed on. Does that offset the cattle grazing on top? I don't know.
And that was going to be my next question around the cattle.
Yeah.
So if we talk practical solutions around the table, and perhaps even reforms, what would you do within the next 12 months, guys and girls, to make some change? What would that look like for you, Steph, if you were to take the system and shake the tree?
Yeah, I think what needs to happen is when there is an issue that, say, an industry body is presenting to government, that it doesn't matter who the minister is or who's working in the department, that if that issue has been raised and continually raised in some circumstances, that it obviously is an issue on behalf of a membership or a bunch of people in the community saying there's a problem with this. And if we're looking at, say, for example, there is one out there at the moment on farm housing, where we continually are saying there is an issue for farmers trying to recruit and retain good employees in the area, but there's no housing in the local town, or it's too far from the local town, and you want to put someone in a property on your land, but there's issues with the Residential Tenancy Act. There are issues with developing more than one residential property on a title. If you want to put worker accommodation in, there are restrictions, it's discretionary. There are all these sorts of issues. So when we go to government and say, can you work with us to resolve some of these problems? We put forward solutions. It sort of goes into the never quite regularly. If they were serious about wanting to engage with us and on behalf of a membership when there is this reoccurring problem, sit down, have the conversations, but don't just have it once. Go through a consultation process that actually actively involves the people that are raising these things, and then go broader, go to other stakeholders, go to farmers on the ground, have the conversations. And then when you're at a point where you think, great, perhaps we'll put something into place and implement it, go back to the people that raised the problem and check that it actually ticks the boxes for what the problem is. We've seen some examples of on-farm housing proposals a year or two ago, and they just didn't tick boxes to make it practical. The land size, for example, didn't accommodate a lot of, say, horticultural growers that had smaller titles, but multiple side by side. But it required you to have a land holding that was the size of all of theirs together as one title only. It required you to put accommodation where there's already existing roadways or existing transmission towers on a property, which would generally be side by side with the owner of the property if they live on site. Things that aren't reasonably practical. And now that legislation's just been, well, draft legislation's just sort of been shelved, and we've followed it up multiple times. I don't know where it's at. I think a better consultation process is not just a one-off conversation or looking at something and putting it to the side, because it becomes frustrating when you've got to keep pushing these issues as well, and you get to the point where you think, what's the point?
And that's the frustrating thing about government. Like, if you were doing that in your own business, you would have a very clear set of deadlines and objectives and costs that we need to get this done by X, Y, Z. You set up your planning structures and you just go and get it done. But in government, there is no imperative to get things done, in the bureaucracy as well. I mean, sometimes there's a political imperative and we see decisions made very quickly for political reasons to get it off the front page or whatever. But, you know, serious structural reform, and it might seem small to some people, but it's a massive issue for others, like actually getting people on your farm to do work to make your farm go better. That's as big as you can get, because stuff doesn't get done by itself. But it just seems to drift on. And, you know, we see the same thing around reform around registration of farm vehicles. You know, there's as many different registration categories as there are farm vehicles, and some of our farmers have got up to 30 registered vehicles on property. It just keeps sliding on. And this is where people get so frustrated with the process, so frustrated with government departments. You know, I've heard state growth called stationary growth because, you know, nothing seems to happen.
Well, I think it's an embedded culture nearly where much of the bureaucracy, you know, look for the issues why you can't do it. And Steph, the issue that you were talking before about housing, you know, we've made numerous representations to government, because in the northeast, for instance, there are farms up there that want to expand. They can't expand because they can't get labour. The logical thing is to put the house on the farm. You can't have a second house on that farm for whatever reasons, one title. So then you say, well, that's fine, understand that. What about a temporary house? So when the farm's sold and that title's sold, you just get rid of the house. You know, just to get things moving. Oh, too difficult, you know. They've all of a sudden fallen on the floor in a fetal position, sucking their thumb, and say it's too difficult. But the issue, what's happening is some of these smaller areas up there, all of a sudden you get 2 or 3 or 4 or half a dozen people, the shop stays open, the pub stays open, the football team gets rebuilt, the school bus goes there, the mail person goes around, delivers the mail. I mean, it's not, that's what we were saying before about, you know, the KPIs. Everyone looks for the financial KPI. Well, some of the decisions that government could make, or the bureaucrats could make, if they had that, you know, it's that old Nike ad, you know, can do, I mean, the benefits flow on through the community. That's one of the great things about agriculture. I mean, the money stays in that local area. The bulk of it stays there. So I think, you know, that's what we need to be thinking about. How do we expand the economy, which is going to value add the community? It's not just about the farmers in rural areas. It's about the whole community.
Consultation, certainly a huge one. Neil, you like the idea of understanding the problem before you try and fix it. What would you shake down to change?
Are we talking big change, little change?
Look, I think we're always after the big ideas, but if there's something practical.
In terms of reforming the bureaucracy, I think departments like the Office of the Coordinator General need a really strong rethink around what problem were they originally created to solve, but what problem should they be solving now, and are they doing it? We need to think about how RecFit properly serves its many different masters internally, and I was sort of in the middle of you know, the alternative energy, the hydrogen side of things when RecFit was created. It was created for a certain set of circumstances. Do those circumstances exist now? Well, probably not. So let's have a rethink and a reset. But I'll just add a word of caution to the revamp of state growth. It needs to happen, but there's a lot of work and good work being done in the background which needs to keep doing. We can't just have things stop now because everyone's worried about what the next 6 months looks like. There's some really important stuff that needs to be done. I know here as an organisation, we're waiting for some changes on grant deeds and decisions that we've been waiting for many, many months. We need to get on with these things. We can't let business as usual stop because we've got to rethink around how the public service looks. We've got to keep the ship moving. We've got to keep plugging up the holes in the bottom.
And you're across it all, I'd like to say.
You're really pumping my tyres.
Oh,
today,
no.
Grace. I like it.
Sally, you've got a good man there. So, what would you change, and where would you go next if you were the Premier of Tasmania?
Well, as Ian, I'm going to get Sally to listen to this podcast because I'm going to get a lot of kudos. But I think, in all seriousness, I think we need to do practical stuff. So the government is going to be working through this big, major macro stuff by re-altering a whole heap of GBEs. I said before that the GBEs need to move away from short-term financial, long-term financial, how that benefits the community. They've got to be able to show how it's going to increase the growth and the well-being of the Tasmanian community. And one of the things that GBEs could do to start with is in Tasmania we've got the AgriVision growth statement that in fact Premier Rockcliffe put out when he was the Minister. We've also got an ag strategy that Minister Pearce is in the process of developing, and that will be, we think, hitting the deck within the month. All the GBEs should be reporting what their department is doing to meet the objectives of the agricultural strategy and the AgriVision strategy. So that makes those departments focus. And some people say, oh, well, what's the point? Well, Tas Networks can start saying how they're helping the agricultural community, the Department of, the Department of Roads, the rail, all those departments. So what it makes them do within the hierarchy of their organisations is just start focusing a little bit on agriculture and how they're making the agricultural sector grow. So it's not just saying we consulted with the Terrys 4 times or something. It's how and what they did to make the berry industry better in Tasmania, both in productivity and lowering the costs.
And the key thing is that the state-owned companies and GBEs need to start talking to one another. So I'm part of a Tas Network stakeholder group. Went to one in Hobart the other week, which was fascinating. And they talked about Tas Networks and planning and strategic planning. So I raised the point that we've got a proposed Tamar Valley irrigation scheme. It's not across the line yet, but we hope it does get there soon. And I said, so how is Tas Networks planning for the power infrastructure to implement that irrigation scheme once it gets on land, pumps and all those sort of things? And the first response was, so which scheme is that?
Right, yeah.
Didn't even know it was on the card. So whose fault that? Not here to poke fingers at it, but if Tasmania, I keep saying this, if Tasmania is to go faster, we all need to be rowing in the same direction, and we all need to know that we've got to have an oar in the water. It just seems so simple. Like that irrigation scheme has been talked about for how long, Steph? Years.
A long time.
A long time, yet we still have the major organisation in this state responsible for energy infrastructure didn't know it was on the cards.
Well, I don't know how you missed the elephant in the room. Talking of elephants, we're sort of heading into that time, and I didn't expect red tape to be quite so thick with the green tape, but there you go. It is quite a big, complex topic. As we usually wrap up, and perhaps just changing the questions slightly today, Steph, I dread to ask, but what keeps you awake, and maybe what, in a happy term, puts you to sleep at night? What's keeping you awake?
Most of the time, it's not actually my 3 children or my husband snoring.
Look out.
No, it's probably more just making sure that when you run a big business, that we can make sure that we continue to be able to run it, to pay the wages of all our employees, make sure that they can support their families, and that nothing goes wrong. And sometimes when things go wrong or they come out of left field, it can really rattle you. And you sit there, and between the two of us, we'll have these conversations like, could we have done this better? Or how did that happen? Or why is this happening? Or why is this person reacting a certain way and it's causing ripples in the business, or whatever it may be. But everyone comes to work to do their job, but everyone also has their own lives and their own baggage. And it's just managing all of those different aspects when you have a workforce. But we need the workforce to do what we do. And well, my husband more so than me, but he loves building things and growing the business and seeking opportunities and being innovative. And while we've still got that, I guess, drive and the passion at the age we are, we want to keep pushing out the boat. But we want to do it in a way where, I guess, things stay on track, they don't go down the toilet, and we're not under stress constantly thinking about it. So I guess that's what keeps us up sometimes, is just making sure we can just keep doing what we're doing without too much trouble.
And if you were to throw your PET hat on, what are the top issues that we're seeing in the workforce and workplace relations from that angle?
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of legislation. There's been a lot of change with the closing loopholes, changes from a federal perspective. So it's keeping across what that means for you as an employer, how to manage employing people, so onboarding, ongoing professional development, if there's issues with staff, making sure that they're done properly, so dotting I's, crossing T's, having proper advice about what to do when there's a problem, or managing performance of employees, or when there is something that's not working in your business, knowing who to go to and getting advice to manage that problem. Sometimes the best way out is to terminate somebody, having the confidence to do that without recourse. But if there is obviously recourse, knowing how to manage that as well, because it can become really stressful. And that's probably the main concern that we have from our members, is how to deal with all of those issues. And then obviously staying relevant. How do you actually be an employer of choice that people want to work for? So how to have a workplace with good culture, how to attract people to come and work for you, and then retain them. And a lot of the issues we've discussed today about having, accommodation nearby, having access to power, having access to clean water, having access to, good logistics and things that make things work, move forward, progress, keeping it interesting. And we like to think in our own business that we do things that make it a better place to work, and the people want to come to work and want to actually have a career there and grow in themselves and be part of a team that all has that same objective.
Yeah, well, big shout out to PET. They're certainly the experts in this area, and it is deep and complex. So if you do have an issue, you can reach out to TasFarmers or directly to PET. Andrew Cameron is certainly the expert in this space, and we would recommend him for those needs. Neil, there's certainly a lot to keep us up in the advocacy and policy space. But if I said French fries, what else is keeping you up at night?
So set aside price and contract negotiations for both major potato processors, which are underway.
They've started?
So it's been talking with Simplot and the Simplot committee quite a lot. We'll have a McCain grower meeting in the next couple of weeks, so there'll be some notices go out around that. There's been some changes on the McCain negotiation committee, so we just need for growers to elect a new committee and give the committee and ourselves sort of some writing instructions as we jump out of the barriers and to try and get the best possible deal we can for Tasmanian potato growers. I reckon the interlinked one with that is the viability of local manufacturing, particularly in the vegetable space, agricultural manufacturing. We do want to see continual reinvestment in manufacturing in Tasmania, because that gives both not guarantees, it gives assurances to growers that they're investing in the right industry, and potatoes in particular are a very expensive industry to invest in. Stewie Appleby told me yesterday that a brand new twin row potato harvester and a tractor to tow it, there's no change out of 1.5 million. That's a lot of potatoes you've got to dig to pay for that, and you're not going to get that money back in one season. Probably not even 10. Yeah, and there'll be 4 or 5 people on the back, and they will be costing you $55 an hour each. Your competing Indian potato grower will be paying $2 a day for a bloke with a Hessian bag wandering around a paddock. So the other thing which is really worrying me, and I'm sure TasFarmers will have more to say, and we're having a lot to say to government around this at the moment, is farm dam safety assessments. So this is bureaucracy in government and internal bureaucracy essentially creating a solution without fully understanding what problem they're trying to solve. And it's of huge concern around the transference of liability away from public liability insurers back onto farmers themselves. It is a muddle, and the chair of our water committee, Malcolm Green, has done some amazing work in the background on this. There's a lot more to come, but I would urge all farmers who have farm dams on their properties, and that would be 100% of them, I reckon, Steph, that it is of concern and will need some really strong advocacy by TasFarmers, but also with the help of farmers as well.
Ian, you look well rested, but I do know we were working late into the night last night. What kept you awake beyond our conversations?
Look, it was really part of our conversations last night, and I think we just need to all be aware that the government are going to be embarking on some significant structural changes within the GBEs and starting with state growth. Now, they're talking about $750 million saving out of all of that, which is going to be good because we are very, very, very fiscally constrained at the moment. But much of that saving will come from people. So we need to have a bit of a heart and just realise that there will be a lot of nervous Nellies out there, and we would urge the government to make sure that they handle that with a high degree of compassion. Flowing on from that thought process, there's a big difference, and we've spoken about it before, there's a big difference between politics and policy. And I haven't heard of, well, it's what time is it at the moment? It's 11:15 in the morning at the moment. So Parliament will be there today, and there will be a truckload of politics, and I could nearly work out what they're saying in there. It's all going to be about people and sacking people and all that stuff. It's just a damn nonsense, and the community are over it. We've had it over the last couple of elections. The whole of Parliament, not just the government, the whole of Parliament needs to put their big boy shorts on and be adults in the room and talk about policy. Now, it's fine to have the politics for a day and, have a bit of fun and make your point, but we really need everyone working together on policy. Not having gotcha moments, not carrying on like pork chops, not, trying to trip somebody up, not running outside to the steps of Parliament House and grandstanding and, making yourself up as a big hero. It should be the whole Parliament. This is one of those generational times where the government has decided that it has to make structural reform. Well, the whole Parliament should be striving for that. Now, get a year out from the election. Well, you can take your gloves off and bash everyone up, but at least get this part done as a whole. And it's a bit like agriculture. I mean, we continually say that agriculture should be bipartisan. I mean, it is a fantastic industry. It really does very little wrong. It has huge, enormous economic, social, environmental benefits. Have it bipartisan. Don't play politics with agriculture. I think this is a time when we're doing proper structural reform for the betterment of Tasmania as a whole, to make us more competitive, not only with the mainland, but internationally. And, Neil's just spoken about, the Indian connection. Now's the time to really kick a goal. And we will be seriously ticked off, not TasFarmers, but I think the whole community, everyone I've spoken to, they want to see the whole Parliament working as one to get proper reforms, not playing politics.
Well, on that bombshell, let's hope that happens. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Steph, for coming in.
Thanks
really
for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
Neil, as always, pleasure.
Thank you.
And Ian, some more wise words. So thank
you. It may not be, but just get the tape to me so I can give to Sally.
Get you 2 copies. And I'd just also like to thank our supporters, the wonderful Telstra and TasBuilt. We'll hope to see you in a fortnight's time. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.